I never knew true darkness until I understood my own family. We were the inbred family everyone whispered about but never actually acknowledged to our faces. The family betrayal that would eventually consume us all started generations before I was born, rooted in isolation, wealth, and a twisted sense of purity. My name is Elara, and I grew up in the isolated, sprawling estate of Blackwood Manor, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Our family had lived on this same land for over 200 years, our bloodlines intertwining like the gnarled roots of the ancient oaks that surrounded our property. We were kept separate from the town below, taught to distrust outsiders, and told that our insular ways were necessary to protect our legacy. What legacy, you might ask? The Blackwood fortune, a massive inheritance built on coal mining, timber, and some say, blood money. The kind of wealth that could make people look the other way when cousins married cousins, when uncles took nieces as wives, and when children were born with deformities that were never spoken of beyond these walls. I knew we were different. I saw it in the way my brother Caleb had a sixth finger on his left hand. I saw it in my Aunt Martha's cleft palate that never properly healed. I saw it in the portraits that lined our grand staircase, the same narrow-set eyes, the same weak chins, generation after generation. But we never spoke of it. We were Blackwoods, and that meant something. At the center of our twisted family tree was my uncle, Silas Blackwood. He was the patriarch, the keeper of the family secrets, and the manager of the Blackwood Trust. Silas was everything a Blackwood man was supposed to be, tall, sharp-eyed, and ruthless. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like he could see every shameful thought you'd ever had. When my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, Silas became my guardian. I moved into Blackwood Manor proper, living under his thumb alongside his son, Julian, who was exactly my age. Julian was everything I wasn't, charismatic, handsome in that classic Blackwood way, and beloved by the family despite being just as inbred as the rest of us. The difference was, Julian knew how to hide our family's imperfections, while I wore mine like a scarlet letter. The years passed, and I turned 21. That was when I was supposed to receive my inheritance, the portion of the Blackwood fortune that had been left to me by my parents. It was substantial enough that I could finally leave Blackwood Manor, make a life for myself beyond the gilded cage I'd grown up in. But Uncle Silas had other plans. The day of my 21st birthday started with promise. I woke before dawn, watching the mist rise from the mountains, imagining myself somewhere far away from this place. I dressed carefully in the one nice dress I owned, a simple black shift I'd bought secretly on a rare trip into town, and made my way downstairs. The family was gathered in the dining room, the long mahogany table set with our fine china and silver that hadn't been used since my grandfather's funeral. Uncle Silas sat at the head of the table, Julian to his right. My various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the other seats, their eyes tracking me as I entered. "Elara," Silas said, his voice like gravel. "Sit." I took my place at the foot of the table, directly across from him. The air was thick with tension, but I told myself it was just the usual Blackwood family discomfort. The staff brought out breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, but no one touched their food. "I suppose you're wondering why we've gathered," Silas said, his eyes fixed on me. "It's my birthday," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I assumed." "We've had some developments with the family trust," he interrupted. "Developments that affect your inheritance." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What kind of developments?" Silas leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "As you know, the Blackwood fortune has been dwindling for years. Bad investments, the decline of coal. I've done everything I can to preserve what's left, but circumstances have forced me to make difficult decisions." Julian wouldn't meet my eyes. He was studying his plate as if the pattern there was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "What are you saying, Uncle?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying that there's no money for you, Elara," he said bluntly. "The trust is essentially empty. What little remains must be used to maintain the estate and care for the family." The room spun around me. Empty? How could it be empty? My parents' portion alone was supposed to be in the millions. That's not possible, I said, my voice rising. My inheritance was in a separate trust, protected. Nothing is protected from mismanagement and bad luck, Silas cut in. I'm sorry, child, but this is the reality we face. You'll continue to have a home here, of course. But there will be no grand departure, no life beyond these mountains. You're a Blackwood, and Blackwoods stay together. The family betrayal was so complete, so brutal, that I couldn't breathe for a moment. I looked around the table at my relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins who I'd grown up with, and saw no surprise on their faces. Only resignation. They'd known about this. They'd agreed to it. It was Julian who finally broke the silence. Father, perhaps we could. Quiet, boy, Silas snapped. The decision is made. That's when I noticed it, the watch on Silas's wrist. A Patek Philippe that had belonged to my father. The ring on his finger, my father's signet ring. He was wearing my inheritance, literally on his person. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. You're lying. Silas's eyes narrowed. Sit down, Elara. No, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You're stealing from me. You're all stealing from me. The family stared at me with identical expressions of pity and disapproval. I was the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the one who didn't understand the sacrifices that had to be made for the family. I ran from that room, from their judgmental eyes, from the crushing weight of their betrayal. I ended up in the library, collapsing into my father's old leather chair, tears streaming down my face. That's where Julian found me hours later. Elara, he said softly, closing the door behind him. I'm so sorry. Did you know? I asked, wiping angrily at my tears. He hesitated for just a second too long. I suspected something was coming. Father's been making comments for months about the family needing to stick together and shared sacrifices. And you didn't warn me? He had the decency to look ashamed. I thought I could change his mind. I thought if I went along with it, I could find a way to make it right for you later. The family drama was unfolding like one of those Reddit stories where everyone in the comments screams that the situation is toxic and the poster should run. But I had nowhere to run to. No money, no skills beyond what was appropriate for a Blackwood woman, which meant playing piano, arranging flowers, and knowing which fork to use at dinner. Julian knelt beside my chair. I'll help you, Elara. I'll make this right. I promise. But even as he said the words, I saw the calculation in his eyes. Julian was his father's son, after all. He might feel guilty, he might even care for me in his way, but he would always prioritize himself and the family name. That was the moment I decided on revenge. The days after my birthday passed in a blur of quiet desperation. I played the part of the resigned, disappointed heiress, accepting my fate with as much grace as I could muster. I attended family dinners, made polite conversation, and bided my time. But behind the scenes, I was searching. If Silas had stolen my inheritance, there had to be records. Documents he'd forgotten to destroy. Evidence I could use against him. I started in the library, where our family records were kept. There were ledgers dating back to the 1800s, detailing every transaction, every investment, every birth and death. I spent nights poring over them by candlelight, learning the intricate history of the Blackwood wealth. What I discovered was disturbing. The fortune hadn't been dwindling, it had been growing. Silas had been investing in tech startups, real estate, and other modern ventures. The money was there, he'd simply moved it, hiding it through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. One night, I found a hidden compartment in my father's old desk. Inside was a letter he'd written to me before his death, never delivered. Asterisk, my dearest Elara, it began. If you're reading this, then I am gone, and Silas has likely tried to keep your inheritance from you. Do not trust him. Do not trust any of them. Our family is built on lies and corruption, and Silas is the worst of us all. The letter went on to detail exactly what my inheritance should have been: properties, stock portfolios, cash assets totaling nearly $15 million. My father had known Silas would try to steal from me. He'd included the name of his lawyer in Charleston, someone who could help me if something went wrong. I felt a surge of hope for the first time since my birthday. I had evidence. I had a path forward. But when I called the lawyer the next day, a polite receptionist informed me that he had passed away 3 years earlier. His practice had been dissolved, his records scattered. I was back to square one, but now with the certainty that I had been robbed intentionally and systematically. That's when I turned to the one place I knew I could find answers: the attic. Blackwood Manor had a massive, sprawling attic that ran the entire length of the house, filled with generations of cast-off furniture, clothing, and memories. It was the perfect place to hide something you never wanted found. I waited until the house was asleep, then crept up the narrow staircase, flashlight in hand. The air was thick with dust and the weight of years. I pushed past steamer trunks and sheet-covered furniture, heading toward the oldest part of the house. And that's when I found them, the journals. Dozens of them, dating back to the founding of the Blackwood dynasty. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, reading by the beam of my flashlight, and learned the true history of my inbred family. The early Blackwoods hadn't just married cousins to keep wealth in the family, they'd committed worse sins. Murder, theft, manipulation. They'd built their fortune on the backs of others, then eliminated anyone who stood in their way. The most recent journals were my grandfather's. His elegant script detailed how he'd suspected Silas of embezzling from various family ventures for years. How he'd planned to cut Silas out of the inheritance entirely before his sudden, fatal heart attack. A heart attack that, according to a cryptic entry, might not have been natural at all. Silas brought me tea tonight, the last entry read. Asterisk told me it would help me sleep. Tastes bitter, unlike our usual blend. If anything happens to me, know that I suspect my own son, asterisk. The entry ended there, mid-sentence. I sat there in the dust and darkness, my hands shaking. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore, I might be uncovering a murder. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked behind me. I whirled around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Julian stood there, his face pale in the stark light. Elara? What are you doing up here? I scrambled to hide the journals behind my back, heart pounding. Just looking for some old books to read. Couldn't sleep. His eyes narrowed. Don't lie to me. I heard you moving around up here from my room. He stepped closer, and I saw that he was holding something, a set of ledgers similar to the ones I'd been studying in the library. What are you doing here? I countered, buying time. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. The same as you, I suspect. Looking for answers. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, two members of an inbred family caught in a silent standoff in a dusty attic. The air between us was thick with unspoken accusations and years of complicated history. Finally, Julian knelt down beside me. I know what my father did to you, Elara. It's wrong. I want to help you make it right. Why should I believe you? I asked, my voice harsh with suspicion. You stood there and let him do it. You're his son. I'm not like him, Julian said, and for the first time, I heard genuine emotion in his voice. I know what people say about our family, that we're all corrupt, that the Blackwood blood is tainted. But I don't want to be that person. I don't want to become him. He opened the ledgers he'd brought. I've been tracking Father's movements for months. He's not just stealing from you, he's been embezzling from the entire family trust, moving money to accounts in the Cayman Islands, buying property under false names. I looked at the detailed notes Julian had made, the transactions he'd highlighted, the patterns he'd uncovered. It was more thorough than anything I'd managed to find on my own. Why? I asked softly. Why are you doing this? Because I love you, he said, the words simple and direct. You're my cousin, my best friend, the only person in this family who's ever really seen me. Not as Julian Blackwood, heir to the Blackwood fortune, but just as Julian. The confession hung between us in the dusty air. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe that I wasn't alone in this fight. Slowly, hesitantly, I showed him the journals I'd found. His face grew pale as he read our grandfather's final entry. You think my father had something to do with grandfather's death, he whispered. I don't know, I said. But I intend to find out. That night in the attic, an alliance was born. We agreed to work together. Julian would continue to monitor Silas's financial movements, while I would dig deeper into the family history, looking for more evidence of wrongdoing. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. During the day, we played our parts, dutiful children of the Blackwood family. But at night, we became partners in crime, meeting in secret to share what we'd discovered. I learned that Julian had always felt trapped by the Blackwood name, just as I had. He'd played the part of the perfect heir because it was expected of him, but he dreamed of a life beyond the mountains, away from the family drama and expectations. Together, we uncovered more of Silas's secrets. The offshore accounts. The forged documents. The way he'd been systematically cutting other family members out of their inheritances for years, convincing them that the money was gone when he was really hoarding it for himself. We even found evidence that he might have been responsible for my parents' car accident, a brake failure that seemed awfully convenient for someone who stood to gain control of their portion of the trust. The more we discovered, the more determined I became to make Silas pay. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about justice. For my parents. For my grandfather. For everyone he'd hurt and manipulated over the years. Julian started moving money, small amounts at first, then larger sums, from Silas's hidden accounts to ones he controlled. We were building a war chest, preparing for the battle to come. I have a plan, Julian told me one night as we sat in the library, the fire casting flickering shadows across his face. A way to expose father and get your inheritance back. I leaned forward, eager to hear his scheme. This was the moment everything would change. But as Julian laid out his intricate plan, I missed the flicker of calculation in his eyes. I didn't see how his fingers trembled slightly as he traced patterns on the desk. I didn't recognize that I was making the same mistake I'd made my entire life, trusting a Blackwood. The family betrayal was about to reach a new level, and I was walking right into it. Julian's plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would stage a digital heist, transferring the bulk of Silas's stolen fortune to secure accounts that we controlled. Then, we would present Silas with an ultimatum: confess his crimes and restore the stolen inheritances, or we would go to the authorities with everything we had. We need to move quickly, Julian said, his eyes bright with excitement. Father is leaving for a business trip tomorrow. It will give us a 48-hour window to access his systems without him suspecting anything. The plan made me nervous. It felt too much like stepping down to Silas's level, becoming as corrupt as he was. But Julian assured me that we were just taking back what was rightfully ours, what Silas had stolen from the family. The ends justify the means, Elara, he said, gripping my shoulders. This is the only way. So I agreed. The next day, as Silas's car disappeared down the long driveway toward the airport, Julian and I set up operations in his private study. The room was dominated by a massive oak desk and walls lined with books that I suspected Silas had never read. Julian sat at the computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Father's security is impressive, but I've been studying his systems for years. I know every backdoor, every vulnerability. I watched over his shoulder, my heart pounding as he bypassed firewall after firewall. Numbers flashed across the screen, account balances that made me dizzy. There was so much money. More than I'd ever imagined. I'm in, Julian said, a triumphant note in his voice. The main account. I just need your biometric authentication to initiate the transfers. I frowned. My authentication? Why would you need that? Father tied all the major accounts to family biometrics, fingerprints, voice recognition, Julian explained without looking at me. It's his way of keeping control. Your prints should work just as well as his. Something felt wrong. The timing, the explanation, the way Julian wouldn't meet my eyes. But I pushed my doubts aside. This was Julian. My cousin. My ally. He produced a small fingerprint scanner from his bag. Just place your thumb here, he instructed. The transfer will be instantaneous. I hesitated for just a second, then pressed my thumb to the cool glass surface. The scanner lit up green. Perfect, Julian whispered. His fingers danced across the keyboard again. Initiating transfer now. I watched the screen, expecting to see numbers moving from Silas's accounts to the ones we'd set up. Instead, I saw something entirely different. Error, transfer failed. Security protocol engaged. Julian swore violently, slamming his hand on the desk. The system has a safeguard I didn't know about. It's locked me out. My heart sank. What does that mean? It means Father will know someone tried to access his accounts. He'll be on the first flight home. Julian ran a hand through his hair, his face pale. We need to go. Now. We scrambled to clean up our traces, wiping down surfaces, shutting down the computer. My mind was racing. What would Silas do when he discovered we'd tried to steal from him? The thought made me physically ill. We were almost to the door when it swung open. Silas stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't supposed to be back for another day. Going somewhere, he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Behind him stood two large men I'd never seen before, private security, by the look of them. Julian stepped forward. Father, I can explain. Be quiet, boy, Silas snapped. His eyes were fixed on me. I knew you would try something like this, Elara. I knew you couldn't be trusted. It's not what you think, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to control it. Isn't it? Silas moved further into the room, his security men flanking him. I received an alert that someone was attempting to access my accounts. Imagine my surprise when I discovered it was coming from my own study. He picked up the fingerprint scanner from the desk. And imagine my even greater surprise when I discovered which family member had authorized the transfer. My blood ran cold. Julian told me. Julian told you exactly what I instructed him to tell you, Silas interrupted. This was all a test, Elara. A way to prove once and for all that you're just as greedy, just as corruptible as the rest of us. I turned to Julian, my heart breaking. You were working with him the whole time? Julian couldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Elara. Father promised me, he said if I helped him trap you, he'd make me his sole heir. The family betrayal was complete. Julian had played me perfectly, using my trust, my affection for him, to set me up. The late-night meetings in the attic, the shared secrets, the promises of alliance, all of it had been a lie. Silas smiled, a cold, cruel expression. You see, my dear, you were never going to win this game. You don't have the stomach for it. He gestured to his security men. Take her to the East Wing. Make sure she can't cause any more trouble. As the men grabbed my arms, I didn't struggle. I was too numb, too devastated by Julian's betrayal. He stood there, watching as I was dragged away, his expression a mixture of guilt and triumph. The east wing of Blackwood Manor had been closed off for years. They threw me into a small bedroom, locking the door behind me. I heard the key turn in the lock, then the sound of their footsteps retreating down the hall. I was alone, trapped in the very house that had been my prison for my entire life. Silas had won. Julian had betrayed me. And I had nothing left to lose. That's when the real revenge began to take shape in my mind. If they thought I was defeated, they had severely underestimated me. I would make them both regret what they'd done to me. I would make the entire Inbred family pay for their corruption. But first, I had to escape. They kept me locked in the East Wing for 3 days. Food was brought to me once a day by one of Silas's security men, a silent, hulking figure who refused to meet my eyes or answer my questions. I spent those days planning, thinking, remembering everything I'd learned about the Blackwood family history. About Silas's weaknesses. About Julian's insecurities. About the dark secrets that lay buried in this house. On the third night, as I lay awake staring at the water-stained ceiling, I heard a soft scratching at my door. Then the sound of the lock turning. I sat up, my heart pounding. Had Silas come to gloat? Had Julian come to apologize? The door opened slowly, revealing not Silas or Julian, but my Aunt Martha, the one with the cleft palate that never properly healed. She was carrying a tray of food, but her hands were shaking so badly the dishes rattled. "Aunt Martha?" I whispered, confused. She put a finger to her lips, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Quickly, child. We don't have much time." She set the tray down and hurried to my bedside. Her eyes, usually downcast and timid, were bright with fear and determination. "I heard what they did to you," she said, her words slightly distorted by her deformity but clear enough to understand. "It's not right. None of it is right." I stared at her, too surprised to speak. Aunt Martha had always been the quiet one, the one who kept to herself and never made trouble. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. "I took this from Silas's study years ago. I thought one day I might need it." I took the book from her trembling hands. It was another journal, similar to the ones I'd found in the attic, but newer. "It's your grandfather's," she explained. "The one he kept in the months before he died. Silas doesn't know it exists." I opened the journal, my eyes scanning the familiar elegant script. The entries were more detailed than the ones I'd found, more explicit in their suspicions about Silas. And then I found it, the proof I needed. A detailed account of Silas's embezzlement, with dates, amounts, and account numbers. A description of how Silas had been slowly poisoning him, making him weak and confused. The final entry was dated the day before his death. "Silas confronted me today," it read. Asterisk told me he knew I was planning to cut him out of the inheritance. He didn't deny the poisoning, he bragged about it. Said he'd been dosing me for months, and no one would ever suspect because heart conditions run in the family. Asterisk. Asterisk, he's right, of course. The Blackwood family is so inbred, so riddled with genetic problems, that no one would question another heart attack. I'm writing this now while I still have the strength. If anything happens to me, know that Silas murdered me. And likely murdered his brother and sister-in-law too. Their car accident was too convenient, too timely, asterisk. Asterisk, I've hidden copies of all the financial documents with my lawyer in Charleston. If you're reading this, find them. Expose Silas for the monster he is, asterisk. Tears streamed down my face as I read the words. My grandfather had known. He'd tried to protect me, tried to leave me a way out. Aunt Martha placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner. I was afraid. Silas, he can be very persuasive when he's angry." The understatement almost made me laugh. Silas didn't get angry, he got even. He destroyed people who crossed him. "Why now?" I asked, wiping my tears. "Why risk helping me now?" "Because I saw what he did to you," she said simply. "And I realized that if I didn't speak up now, I'd be just as guilty as he is." She helped me escape through a hidden passageway that led from the east wing to the garden. The tunnels had been built during Prohibition, used by my ancestors to smuggle alcohol. Now they would be used to smuggle me to freedom. "Where will you go?" Aunt Martha asked as we stood in the moonlit garden. Charleston, I said, clutching the journal to my chest. I need to find grandfather's lawyer. Or what's left of his practice. She nodded, pressing a wad of cash into my hand, her life savings, she called it. Be careful, child. Silas has eyes everywhere. I hugged her tightly, this woman who had been a ghost in my life until tonight. Thank you, Aunt Martha. I won't forget this. Then I turned and slipped into the night, leaving Blackwood Manor behind me. I didn't look back. There was no going back now. The revenge story that would eventually become one of those Reddit stories that people can't stop talking about was just beginning. And Silas and Julian had no idea what was coming for them. Getting to Charleston was easier than I expected. I hitchhiked most of the way, keeping to myself, the journal tucked safely in my bag. The cash Aunt Martha had given me was enough for a bus ticket for the last leg of the journey. Charleston was a different world from the mountains, all humid salt air and historic buildings, a place where old money left its marks on every wrought iron gate and cobblestone street. I found a cheap motel room and started my search for grandfather's lawyer. The lawyer, a man named Arthur Pembroke, had indeed passed away, as I'd been told. But unlike what the receptionist had said, his practice hadn't been completely dissolved. His daughter, Eleanor, had taken over some of his clients, though she primarily worked in real estate law now. I managed to get an appointment with her, posing as a potential client interested in buying property in the area. Her office was in a historic building near the Battery, with a view of the harbor. Eleanor Pembroke was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. She listened patiently as I explained my fictional real estate needs, then leaned forward when I casually mentioned my grandfather's name. You're Elias Blackwood's granddaughter, she asked, her expression shifting slightly. I nodded, my heart pounding. You knew him? My father did, she said. He often spoke of Mr. Blackwood. Said he was one of his most interesting clients. I took a risk then, deciding to trust her. Miss Pembroke, I know this is going to sound strange, but I think my grandfather left something with your father. Documents. Evidence. It's important. She studied me for a long moment, then stood and went to a large filing cabinet in the corner. I wondered if someone would ever come asking about this. She returned with a large sealed envelope. My name was written on it in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. My father instructed me to keep this safe until you came for it, she said. He said it was a matter of life and death. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Thank you, I whispered. You have no idea what this means. Back in my motel room, I tore open the envelope. Inside was everything I needed to destroy Silas's bank statements, property deeds, signed affidavits from people Silas had wronged over the years. And most damning of all, a toxicology report from after my grandfather's death that showed evidence of slow poisoning. Silas hadn't just stolen my inheritance, he was a murderer. Several times over. Now I had the proof. The question was what to do with it. I could go to the authorities, of course. But Silas had friends in high places. He donated to political campaigns, played golf with judges, and had half the local police department on his payroll. There was no guarantee that justice would be served through official channels. No, I needed something more public. Something that would expose Silas to the world and ensure he couldn't buy or bully his way out of consequences. That's when I remembered the journals, the stories, the twisted history of the Blackwood family. People loved a good family drama, especially one involving old money, corruption, and murder. This had all the elements of a story that could go viral. I decided to write it all down, every sordid detail. I would create a confessional narrative so compelling, so shocking, that it would spread across the internet like wildfire. I would become one of those Reddit stories that gets picked up by news outlets, discussed on podcasts, shared across social media. Silas had tried to keep the Blackwood secrets hidden. I would drag them all into the light. I spent weeks crafting my story. I included scanned documents, photographs, excerpts from the journals. I created a timeline of Silas's crimes, from the first instances of embezzlement to the murder of my grandfather. I created anonymous accounts on every platform I could think of: Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I reached out to true crime podcasts, YouTube channels that specialized in revenge stories, journalists who had written about financial crimes. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I launched my digital assault. I posted the story everywhere simultaneously, using every relevant keyword and hashtag I could think of: ****Inbred family ****, family betrayal, revenge stories, family drama, Reddit stories. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My notifications exploded. The story began to spread, first in small circles, then wider and wider. People were captivated by the twisted tale of the Blackwood family, horrified by Silas's crimes, and cheering for my revenge. By the end of the first day, major news outlets were picking up the story. By the end of the week, there were calls for investigations, protests outside Blackwood Manor, and enough public pressure that even Silas's powerful friends couldn't protect him. I watched from my motel room as the world I'd known crumbled. Silas was arrested on charges of murder, attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. Julian was arrested as an accomplice. The Blackwood fortune was frozen pending investigation. I had won. I had gotten my revenge. But as I sat there watching the news coverage, I felt strangely empty. The money, the property, the vindication, none of it filled the hole that the family betrayal had left in me. I thought about leaving it all behind, changing my name, disappearing to someplace where no one had heard of the Blackwoods. But then I remembered Aunt Martha, and the other family members who had been victims of Silas's greed just as I had. I had a responsibility to them. To use the Blackwood fortune for good. To break the cycle of corruption and cruelty that had defined our family for generations. I returned to Blackwood Manor a month later, after Silas and Julian had been denied bail and were awaiting trial. The house felt different, lighter, as if the evil that had haunted it was finally gone. Aunt Martha greeted me at the door, her face filled with a hope I'd never seen there before. "You did it, child," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "You set us free." I spent the next few months working with lawyers to untangle the Blackwood assets, returning stolen inheritances to family members, selling off properties and investments that had been acquired through illegal means. I established a foundation to help victims of financial crimes and family abuse. The revenge story that had started with betrayal and anger had become a story of redemption and healing. I had made Silas and Julian regret their actions, not through violence or further corruption, but through truth and justice. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that moment in the attic when Julian betrayed me. The pain is still there, a scar that will never completely fade. But I've come to understand that family betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can be the thing that makes you stronger, more compassionate, more determined to create something better. The Blackwood family legacy would no longer be one of corruption and cruelty. It would be a story of revenge turned to redemption, of secrets brought into the light, of a young woman who refused to become what her family had tried to make her. And that, perhaps, was the sweetest revenge of all. 1 year later. The trial of Silas and Julian Blackwood was dubbed the **** revenge story *** of the century by the media. I testified, along with Aunt Martha and several other family members who had been victims of Silas's crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Silas was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Julian, who had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, got 15 years. I visited Julian once before he was transferred to a federal prison. He looked older, diminished, the arrogance completely gone from his bearing. "I'm sorry, Elara," he said through the thick glass. "For everything." I nodded. "I know." There was a long silence between us, filled with all the things we could never take back or make right. "I loved you, you know," he said softly. "In my way." I was just too much my father's son to show it properly. The apology didn't fix anything. It didn't heal the wound of his betrayal. But it allowed me to close that chapter of my life, to move forward without the weight of anger and bitterness. Blackwood Manor is now a museum and retreat center for victims of family trauma and financial abuse. I kept a small cottage on the property for myself, but most days I'm traveling, using the Blackwood fortune to help others who have experienced the kind of betrayal I went through. Sometimes people recognize me from the news stories, the Reddit stories, the YouTube videos that still get millions of views. They ask me if I'd do it all again, knowing what I know now. I always give the same answer: I didn't choose this path. It chose me. But I would never go back and change what happened, because it made me who I am today. The story of the Inbred family from the Appalachians still fascinates people. There are books being written, documentaries being filmed, podcasts being recorded. I don't participate in most of them. I've said everything I need to say. My revenge is complete. But my work is just beginning.